All right, hey everybody. I'm Jason Treuting. As always, I am your fearless host of this podcast, this Brooklyn Bound podcast, and I'm very pumped. We have a show coming up at Roulette. It's a percussion marathon, Brooklyn Bound percussion marathon, and we have all sorts of amazing percussionists joining us, some old friends and some new friends. And I have an old friend and a new friend here, 2/3 of the trio. I'm going to get myself in trouble here, Kaoru, Borogusakagu.
There we go.
We're gonna go deeper into that name in a second, but I have an older friend, Kaoru Watanabe, here on the bottom of the screen, and a new friend, Rogério Boccato. Just as of now, Rogério, can we call ourselves friends?
Oh yes, for sure.
We caught up enough before I pushed record. We could call ourselves new friends. I'm psyched to be in the same room as you soon. You know, we can actually get a little bit deeper. Well, thank you all for being here. We were just talking about how crazy schedules it is to get this all to line up. So these two are 2/3 of the trio. I'll be talking with Sameer Gupta a bit later. But I'm so excited about this. Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe Kaoru, I'm gonna start maybe asking you a question just because I've known you longer. It was so cool to see your set at Joe's Pub last month.
November?
Last year,
couple months ago, yeah.
Oh yeah, all those things. And it brought me back to, I think when we first met was at Joe's Pub a long while ago.
I think so. I think it must have been 2008-ish. And I just left after living in Japan for 10 years. I had just come back to New York, and I was with Kodo, that taiko ensemble, for 10 years or so. And I just left the group, came back to New York, and they were on tour. And they didn't have a show in New York. Carnegie had officially kicked them out because they made too much noise.
Was it one of those things they could be heard from the other hall?
Exactly.
Yeah. And we run into that.
I think Soul Percussion played one night when Kodo was, and then you guys complained or something. Is that?
Yeah, oh yeah. Sure. I'm sure that's what it was.
That's the reason.
And then and so they had a tour. And they had like a night off, and they were playing, I think, at NJ Pack like 2 nights later. And so they had a couple of nights off, and like, you want to put some together, just like any like small thing? And I'm like, sure. And I called up Joe's Pub, and so Kodo played Joe's Pub like 3 nights in a row or something. And one funny thing was that Laurie Anderson played a set before Kodo did on one of the nights.
Oh, amazing.
And so I saw her play, and I just met her briefly then. But the reason I bring that up is I kind of became friends with Laurie just recently, like last year. And now I'm thinking, like, I didn't even bring it back to her when I was hanging out with her recently, but it was like, I first met Laurie that night too, the same night as I met you at Joe's Pub. So
I love Joe's Pub for that reason.
Yeah.
So that's the first time. I've only seen Kodo twice, I think, and that was the first time.
Oh, wow.
To see, you picture. I grew up on those records, so I was like so pumped in high school. I was like, I was transcribing that. I was the nerdy,
Wow.
I got my friends together and we would try to do these transcriptions on drums, like not on
really?
on drums.
Cool. Yeah.
I don't know if I was to show you or the other dudes, I'm not sure if it would be a good thing or a bad thing, but it was
I'm curious.
Learn that language a little bit. But then to see Kodo in such a small space the first time, as opposed to what you'd imagine, so cool.
That was very special for them too.
That's such a cool way to see it. So I've known you since then. When I've thought about it, Kaoru, we've done a few things together. There's so obviously more to be done. But we've had some cool shows together, both you with So and you coming to talk to our students, and at Princeton playing a bit with you. So I know a bit about your history, but maybe in a quick way. This trio. You alluded to the fact that you lived in Japan for 10 years with Kodo. Before that, you were born here.
Born here. Parents were in the St. Louis Symphony, so I grew up with in a classical music household. Studied jazz starting around high school. Moved my focus from jazz or classical into jazz. Went to Manhattan School of Music to study jazz, flute, saxophone. And then when I graduated, I moved to Japan. Spent 10 years there. That kind of transformed my life. I went from being like a kid from St. Louis, jazz musician, to a I think I culturally identify now as Japanese. It's just I didn't when I was growing up. I learned the language as an adult, but now everything I do professionally and even personally is very kind of Japanese centric in a way, and also trying to figure out how that whole Japanese culture, Japanese music, Japanese language, how does that fit into my life here in New York? Again, both professionally and personally. And so, yeah, musically, it's all about that sort of exploration and seeing where these different cultures intersect and interweave.
And did you, when you moved to Japan, did you move to play with Koto, or you moved to Japan for other reasons and then you moved to play?
So the fundamental thing was to learn about who I was, right? And knowing, because I have a Japanese, my heritage is Japanese, is I wanted to know about that. And for me, being a musician, studying Japanese music was, to me, my entry point, right? And seeing Koto at Carnegie Hall when I was in college, and think, okay, there's so much mystery on that stage. It's moving and compelling, but I didn't know what they're singing about, or why they wore those costumes, or what the rhythms meant, or what the songs are about. And trying to decipher those mysteries was kind of why I went to Japan. So thinking joining Koto was kind of the main focus, but I before I joined, I was spending about half a year in Tokyo, and I was studying Noh theater and Edo Bayashi, these different traditional forms of Japanese music. And also getting to know my relatives, like, and learning the language and just, and a lot of that, I don't know, going back, I don't know how deep I want to get into it, but studying jazz in Manhattan School of Music, and then really started getting me thinking more about heritage, because I'm playing music that was created by Black people historically and developed by Black people. And so what is my connection to that music and to that heritage and to that? And I knew I didn't feel comfortable embracing that or really, diving deeper into that before I really understood what my own culture and heritage was about.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And so you lived, I know this just a little bit because I mentioned maybe before we rolled tape, my sister, lived in Japan for 30 years now or something, over 30 years. Like, she's 10 years older than me and basically got out of the States as quickly as she could. When she was of age, she was like, I'm not sure this is the place for me. Like classic expat, but she would get on a motorcycle with her ex-husband now with Stomu, and they would get on a motorcycle and drive up from Kyoto to Sado Island and go to those festivals every year. So I'm sure, I'm sure she saw. I mean, that just feels like that's something I need to do sometime, and I would just hear these stories, and it's so cool. So we're gonna have to talk more to dive deeper into where both of you all come from, because I'm sure musically we're not gonna have enough right now to get into the depths. But Rogério, I want to know what your story is getting up to this moment of starting to play in this trio. What's your background?
Well, quickly, I'm from Brazil originally, and started playing drum set and really got in love with jazz and straight ahead, and that's all I wanted to do. And actually I wanted to come to New York to study, to get deeper into bebop and all that. And at some point I found myself kind of similar to Kaoru, kind of questioning, you have this love for jazz, but I'm also Brazilian, and Brazilian music or Brazilian culture has so much, it's so rich and had so much music and percussion. So I was lucky enough to follow some friends' advices, saying, hey, you gotta look back. I mean, jazz is great, but what's your future? What's going to happen? So looking into my own culture and kind of also finding my own identity helped me to go and research Brazilian music and Brazilian percussion. And then when I moved here 15 years ago, that's what kind of, actually I said I wanted always to come here to study, and what made me move was an invitation from the Hart School to teach Brazilian percussion. So that was the link, the chance to come. And I was like, what? I want to learn, and then I'm put in this position of teaching. But eventually, that was like 16 years ago, and I'm still here. And I later I realized that if I would have come to just study jazz, I would maybe stay for 2 years and doing a master's degree and then back to Brazil, because there's so many great jazz drummers here. That's where you would come here. But then through this other route, it helped me to stay, and all my love for jazz and my experience playing jazz with, records and people kind of helped me to integrate what I do with jazz musicians. So I mean, I know some Brazilian musicians that would come here and kind of stay in the Brazilian music realm, and that's what they do. And somehow for me, my interactions with other people is more like, I don't know, my own personal interpretation of everything, and not so much like strictly, Brazilian rhythms, it's more, I think, because of this jazz background. And so it's kind of, I have this easy way to understand and interact with jazz musicians and musicians in general. I mean, here in New York, it's just a world, right, of people, everybody, like, even in this trio, like Indian background, Japanese and Brazilian, and we are all here, and there's so much culture from all over the world. So it's great to be inside this environment.
Interesting. I haven't talked to Sameer yet, but I mean, it seems really interesting that there's this kind of jazz connection between the two of you all. And thinking about, so I in my undergrad, I studied jazz as well. I went into my undergrad. This podcast is not about me, but to share, I went into my undergrad as a classical musician, and then the jazz department was just pretty cool for a couple years. I was at Eastman School of Music, and it was this weird time where it was like super traditional conservative jazz program, and then there were these 4 years where these two guys from Cal Arts came and just really mixed it up in an awesome way. And then they both got fired, and it went back to, it was like this real, like, 4 years. Michael Caine was there, and Ralph Alessi, and these amazing improvisers. And it was really exciting to be there. But I remember the conversation in the late 90s, and I'm not sure, I imagine you all remember this conversation too. It was very much a like Keith Jarrett Winton kind of conversation about like, does the clock stop in 1964, or can we keep going? And like, Dylan went electric, like all that kind of, like, can we plug in? Can we go?
Swing versus not swing.
Totally, yeah. And I think I have a broader view of it now, but in the moment I was definitely like, okay, you're supposed to choose sides. I went down Keith Jarrett's road, and just thinking about it. But in some ways, it's really interesting to listen to what you all do now with a background of, like, there's this jazz language that you all bring in addition to these three different traditions, and an idea that maybe, I don't, not to put words in your mouth, but maybe jazz didn't stop in 1964 or whatever. Like, maybe it's a living art and not a conserving kind of space. I haven't thought about that influence, and that's really cool to listen to what you all do with that in mind. Am I putting words in anybody's mouth, or does that ring to it all?
I think that's exactly it. I mean, all three of us can go into our respective bags, right? The Japanese, Brazilian, Indian thing, but we all are jazz musicians also. And so when we can, so we can contribute, we have this thing in Brazil, we have this thing in India, we have it, but then we also just know without having to speak about form or structure or improv or different rhythmic concepts and things. So I think, and I think we've all done projects where, like, I'll work with only Japanese musicians who specialize in, and that's a very different kind of collaboration, a different process. But with this trio, it's there isn't a lot of talking about the music, it's just we get together and play. We it's kind of a thing. As we're developing, and we've been together for a couple of years, but we play actually very sporadically. We all have our own projects going, and we try to find these little opportunities to get together. But when we do get together, sometimes it's like, okay, should we prepare stuff, or should we just kind of go at it? And it more and more, it's kind of like, at the beginning, I think we prepared more stuff, but now it's more like, let's not prepare, and let's just really be in the moment. And all three of us, I think, also have projects where we're very, quote unquote, the music is more set, or has more form. But I think in this particular configuration, and it might change. I mean, maybe for this Brooklyn Bound, we're going to play all written music. I don't know, Rogério, what do you think?
Start writing quick.
Yeah, let me start right now.
I gotta go.
Yeah.
Well, so tell me about the trio. Maybe Kaoru, would you mind keeping the mic just for one more second to give us that story of the title of the trio, because I did not lay it out correctly. But it feels like it's a fun, I can totally imagine the way you're titling a band. How does this go? What are we gonna do? And it feels like the answer was kind of cool.
Yeah. So the name Borogusakagu. Borokusoi in Japanese means just old and rotten and falling apart. Kagu means furniture. So it's like roughly translated falling apart, old, rotten furniture. But it's, if you take the first syllable of each of our names, Boro is Boccato, Rogério, Gusa is Gupta, Sameer, and then Kagu is Kaoru, and we couldn't fit the wa in there. So we just have another gu in there. So my name in this trio is Kaoru Gupta, right? And yeah, and so that's it. I mean, it's just, it's silly, but you know, it's irreverent, you know, to be, you know, kind of corny.
That's what I say. I couldn't put a pin in it, or I couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was, but something about the rotting furniture, like it's a neat, like, I don't know, there's something neat about that. From what I've been able to listen to of the trio, not you're not rotting anything, but like there's something, the irreverence there. So Rogério, how did the trio meet, and how did you start playing?
Well, we all met through Adam Rudolph, because we were playing in the Go Orchestra, Organic Orchestra, and then at different times, because that group of people changes a lot, and I remember, you know, meeting at some point Kaoru there, and then we did some stuff out of that context, and then Sameer came other times, and then I remember in one of the recordings, I think we're in the studio and just start playing, you know, and then from there I think it clicked, and then we decided to get together out of that space and just the three of us, and then, you know, opportunities came for us to collaborate, and then we arrived in this kind of format of each of us bringing, you know, our own backgrounds and then just interacting. And going back to the jazz common denominator, I feel like jazz is the space, you know, we kind of meet in that space, and with the mind very open, which I think through this experience, I mean, of course, improvisation happens in so many different traditions, but I feel like our experience with jazz gave us this space to just interact and go for it, you know, and the sensibility to really hear and follow, you know, each other as we compose together.
And I've taught a little bit in my teaching. I teach, the percussionist I teach are at a conservatory, at Bard College Conservatory. So it's like a classical space. And I'll use improvisation as a kind of listening tool there, a little bit, like, you know, and say, actually, like, what we're going to do now is actually free improvisation, not in terms of what you think free improvisation sounds like as a genre, you know, but like actually, like, let's make a sound and listen to it and respond to it, and almost use it as a listening exercise where we're not even trying to sound good or bad, but we're trying to communicate. When you all sit down, I like the way you put that, Rogério, like this is a jazz space. And in some ways I know what that means in terms of like a openness to follow something. But do you think of what you all do as free improvisation, or is there a way, you know, you're going to play with each other that could be slightly different than you may play? Like, could you all sit together and could Kaoru play something that's like, wait a minute, that's not what we do? You know what I mean? Like, is there a kind of like unspoken vibe to the trio, or does it feel
aesthetic?
Like, yeah.
I think we embrace it all, and we usually just start playing, and I would say that we compose together in the moment. I mean, that's what we're trying to do. We're not just create a vibe, or, you know, we're trying to express something and communicate, and so what is missing here? Can I contribute with this, or should I just stay out? You know, that's, to me, is the mindset. And I don't feel like anybody can play anything that we go like, oh, what? I mean, it's just you know, whatever you're bringing, I'm just gonna embrace and try to complement that, or, you know, let it go or something, you know, just try to find an arc on everything. And so I wouldn't think the label free improvisation, although it is what we're doing. We're improvising, we're creating together without any preconceived form or anything. But when you say free improvisation, you already have some kind of sound in your head, which is not exactly
the genre in itself.
The genre as opposed to the concept. So it feels like you're saying it's more this concept of real freedom. I'm not trying to actually, I feel like as I talk about it, I'm saying this is better than this or whatever. Like, I think free improvisation as a genre is awesome, but I think what you're saying is maybe like, it's not that genre, but it's a space to really follow. Is that resonating, Kaoru, or do you need to correct your bandmate at all?
Oh, no. I'm trying to, I'm trying to figure, because also we do a lot of, like the last time we played together, we had a guitarist joining, and that was very like groove, like rock, blues, like very tinged, you know. And it wasn't like we're like, okay, that's too much, that's too bluesy. No, it was like we just went with it. It became like a bluesy thing, and that was great. So it's really malleable, and in a way, even though our first time performing was years ago, it still feels very new, just because we don't get together as much as we'd like to. So it's like, it in a way, it doesn't have any identity yet, like in a kind of in a liberating way. It's like we like create a new identity each time we get together.
Maybe. So what's at the Roulette show, what are we picturing? If those of us who are listening to this podcast who've never heard you play, there are three percussionists. Sameer plays tabla, and I'm forgetting in the video that I saw of you all, was he just playing tabla, or were there other instruments as well?
He in the past he's played drum set, but I think this time he's just gonna play tabla.
Right? I think he had like 5 or 6 tablas, you know, and then he kind of goes around, you know, with the tuning, and he has more options than just the classical.
And just the two
tablas.
Yeah. And for you, Rogério, if I'm remembering right, what I have in my mind is there's a shout out to a drum set in a certain way, but some of the instruments may be, subbed out and differently than maybe classic jazz drum set. Maybe there's more Brazilian instruments subbed into that space. Is that?
It's kind of a collection of instruments from all over. And my original setup was, I mean, you could think about kind of a drum set made of percussion, but very open. I mean, not like no ride cymbal, no cymbal at all, no snare drum or anything. But I think lately I've been gravitating more towards, instead of having a setup, just having a collection of instruments and grabbing as I needed, you know, instead of, because I feel like a setup already puts me in a zone, like, okay, I have to do this, you know. And if I just spread some instruments around, it feels more like, oh, what flavor? Oh, this, you know, I need this, I need that, instead of kind of directing me already to sound like something, you know, in terms of function either.
Like as soon as you have a ride cymbal, you're going to do something. Yeah. It's going to lead you somewhere, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Already, it's kind of, it puts you in that zone, you know, like it kind of leads you in that way, like you said. So I feel in some ways,
I would think of a drum set. Do you think of it this way? In some ways, the most basic thing about a drum set is that you're using your feet and your hands. Like that's a gift. So when you get your setup together, are you thinking about your feet and your hands?
Initially, I brought a very big shaker. Actually, it's here.
Yeah, show and tell.
There's like a very big metal shaker that people play in the northeast of Brazil, like. And I got this there, and I started doing this, like playing with my hands, you know, over this foam. And then I've been for years trying to find something that I could use on my left foot as a hi-hat.
Right.
And I tried everything, and then one day I was in bed, and then I was like, oh, what if I do the same tapping but with my foot? And it's perfect. So that is my left foot, and I have a pedal backwards on the cajon. You know, that's sort of the drum set adaptations. But for this, I started dropping the bass drum very early in the game, because Kaoru has those big taikos.
It's hard to compete.
and we don't need it. You know, it's hard to compete, but you don't need it. And also
Kaoru
this,
just kept bringing bigger and bigger taiko until you got the
I got discouraged.
That was a shaker.
So also the shaker at some point, like, you know, I mean, I kind of got out of this drum set mindset, you know, and I feel it's liberating for me because I don't have to perform that kind of role of timekeeping or anything like that, you know, because it's more like the layers in the individual voices instead of me trying to sound like more than one person, you know? Because I feel the drum set is that you're trying to create the roles of 3 or 4 people at the same time. So I'm kind of dropping that and just being my one voice instead of.
That's a really cool way to look at it, Rogério. I haven't put that together. I've played quite a bit. There was a band in college I played with for many years where it was kind of 2 drummers, but then we kind of found our roles where I became more of a drummer, and my buddy would also play with his feet some, but became more of a percussionist role. And that mindset feels strangely very different, you know. And I was better at one and not so good at the kind of you know, playing just the right thing at the right time or coloring something in a certain way, or what is the sound that this moment needs. That's like such a cool, to me at least, I don't know, a percussionist mindset of like, you know, contributing that in that moment. So would some of these, would a pandero be one of these instruments, or would a
pandero, triangle, and zabumba, which is this bass drum from the northeast of Brazil as well, and cachixis and all kinds of shakers, and then all kinds of other things that are not even Brazilian, but that I embrace, and just sounds and some kitchen objects, you know, all kinds of metal things, and variety of sounds, colors, and
I'm sorry, I was waving. Mabel was just showing me a Lego set she just saved up for, apparently. At like what this small house needs is more Legos. I'm just saying that's obviously what we need here. Man, I'm excited to see your rig, Rogério. It's cool. Of course, it's not limited to just Brazilian instruments, but like, I mean, even saying triangle, I'm excited for that. You know what I mean? Like, I know at Bard College, when somebody says I'm playing triangle, I don't get excited about it. You know what I mean?
Well, it's definitely a different kind of sound, a different tradition, and it's one of my favorite instruments, actually. Yeah, it's a whole universe.
All right, I'm taking triangle lesson at some moment, Rogério. I'm excited about that sound too. I can't. The muting and the unmuting and the. I imagine it's not clipped to a stand, or, you know, like I imagine. Yeah. Oh, amazing.
Talking about playing drum set with percussion, like Rogério also plays with Brian Blade, like one of the top jazz drummers in his group, and so Rogério's up there doing that, and it's really magic, like what he brings to that set, and also other groups as well. But
that's amazing.
That's one.
I've been a Brian Blade fan for a while, of course. Like, you know, Joshua Redman comes on the scene and you learn about, you know, but then I've become more of a fan, like listening to him in some different, I mean, like that Joni Mitchell album, or like listening to him stretch out in some different spaces has been really, really cool. Oh man, so much to catch up on over a drink sometime. That's remarkable. Kaoru, I forgot to ask you now what instruments you're going to have on stage. I can picture a footprint.
Yeah. Besides, so I think for this time I'm going to bring my one large taiko drum. Sometimes I'll have like a set of taiko drums, but I think I'll just have maybe one large one, maybe a couple of smaller ones, and then also some percussion, all Japanese percussion, bells, and also my flutes. So I play a wide variety of Japanese bamboo flutes.
Sorry, this is a percussion marathon, Kaoru.
Sorry,
it's in there. Play them very percussively.
It's already in the writer. It's gonna.
If I hear a melody, Kaoru.
No melody, no long tones.
And tell me again. This is a moment I would love to learn, because I think what are the names of the Japanese flutes you play? Because I think it's so easy for me to pull shakuhachi as a name, and I know that's not the flute you play.
The shakuhachi is an end blown flute. I play all transverse flutes. The three that I kind of will probably maybe play, one is the shinobue, which is kind of a basic Japanese bamboo flute, shinobue. And then there's the one that used in no theater and kabuki theater called no-kan. There's a flute used in gagaku, which is court music, called the ryuteki. Yeah, and those are the kind of three that I might be messing around with if I end up picking one up. But again, it really depends on what I'm feeling, what I'm hearing from Rogério and from Sameer.
And are these flutes, are they in specific key? Do they live in certain modes, or do they?
Yes. So the shinobue, there's pretty much a diatonic scale. So I have many for all the different keys. The ryuteki is also in a very specific modality, specific to gagaku music. There's some quarter tones in there as well. And the no-kan, the one that's used in no theater and kabuki theater, is very interesting in that there isn't a specific scale. So no two no-kan are made with the same scale.
Wow.
It's an atonal flute, basically. So in traditional Japanese theater, in no theater, kabuki theater, you'll never see two no flute players playing together because they won't be able to play together. They can't.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's a really, like, as a flute player, like a classical flute player growing up, it's like, what is that? Like, how do you wrap your, like, what does that mean? You have two flutes that are, there's no scale, a tuning scale on it. And so even when you're studying no-kan, your flute will be different from your teacher's flute.
Wow.
So he might play this fingering and you have to play a different fingering to get the same pitch.
Oh, wow.
And so and someone else might be studying with that person, I was like, okay, well, my other teacher was doing this fingering. It's like, oh, well. So there's all these weird,
I love that so much.
It's a crazy,
But so what makes, like, is it a certain number of pitches are on every note?
So it's not a specific scale, but it's an approximate kind of, And
like
so
a five pitch scale or a 7 pitch scale.
It's not even 5. It's like the octaves are different from each other.
Right.
And so it's really a tone. The no-kan is about the tone. And it's melodic and it's rhythmic, but it's also, but the singers in no theater aren't getting pitches from the flute.
Right. Wow.
So the flute player will play one pitch and then the singers will just pick their own pitch to go with.
Wow.
And it's not a set pitch either. Like they'll start on one pitch and then they'll take a break and then 10 minutes later they're singing a different.
Okay, so we need second conversations with each of you about your lineage, and we need a third conversation just about this.
About
transverse, is that what you said? Transverse flutes?
Yeah.
Jeez, man. I mean, I love that so much. Like, when you say an octave is not an octave, like there's so much there to talk about. Like, what is an octave? Like, what does it mean to say? Like, that's amazing. I just feel like a door just open, like, what's in here?
It's endless. And the great thing about, like, this, I love about this trio is that we'll go on these conversations. So we'll spend half our time talking about these different rhythms and instruments and scales and eighth notes, feels and then some. And of course, we are bringing in such different things. Like no other flute player, fouet player, or taiko player really plays like me, and no other Brazilian percussionist plays like Rogério. And tabla player, like Sameer's doing very different things on tabla that, because he's bringing all this drum set stuff in there. He's bringing all sorts of other influences in there. So the three of us, even in our own worlds, are kind of special, have our own thing happening. So then we come together and it's this whole bizarre universe, I think. That's
amazing. Well, when just accidentally a drum set shows up on the stage plot and you don't know I'm coming, I'm about to just jump in and say, oh my gosh, this sounds like a dream group of people to play with. Jeez, man. At least in the sound check. Kick me up on the show, but I at least want to get a taste of what it feels like inside this. This sounds amazing. Well, so quickly medium quickly to wrap up, there's 2 questions I've been asking everybody on this podcast. Really, we went to video kind of around the pandemic, and I feel like, in March and April, in May, the question was kind of like, I don't know what you all were feeling, but I was feeling like, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Like, does the world need me to do what I'm doing? Like, what's this space? What is this? And over
you think 2020 or 2021?
Exactly, both, like all of the above. But March, 2020 was like, all the shows are canceled.
Yeah.
Texts from people I love saying like, oh, we need artists right now. And me being like, yeah, but my kid's in front of a Zoom screen just like your kid is. Like, what's this world? What's happening? Why am I here as an artist, you know? And just thinking like rethinking some things about how we work and how we can work, you know. But then I feel like as into May and June, then that conversation all of a sudden is like, oh my gosh, like George Floyd's murder. I feel like we were all slowed down enough, at least for me to speak from my scene, where conversations about equity and racism, you know, became conversations that you couldn't not have anymore. And so what does that mean? I think, you know, you were alluding not to it, Kaoru, but just to the history of the music you were learning. And when you were learning jazz, like, what does it mean for a Japanese American to learn a Black tradition? And, you know, just these conversations, you know, and I mean, whatever, we could spend the rest of the podcast adding the next 2 years, all of these events of like, you know, what does it mean to make music in this space? So I imagine there's 18 different answers over these 2 years, but you know, what has the conversation been like for you, either individually or, you know, as a group, or just as friends, you know, about thinking about what your role is as a musician, and has your practice changed at all in these last 2 years, or have you kind of, I've talked to some people in a really great way. It feels like you can kind of double down on some things that you've felt for a while and said, no, this is important to me and let me see this through, you know. What has that process been for you all at all? Small question. Yes or no? Rogério, yes or no? No.
Well, I feel like I've been through different phases, you know. Like I spoke over the phone with some musicians, friends of mine, that they were like, I'm in the couch for this last month. I didn't touch my instrument. I don't feel like touching. And I was like, oh, wow, how come? You know, and I was, in my mind, I was, man, everybody, I mean, there's no way to go, where to go. So I'm going to catch up everything I didn't practice in this last 30 years. And suddenly I kind of felt like, man, this is not working. I mean, it's just like your emotional mood just went down. And I thought, oh, I understand that guy on the couch now. You know, I went through many different phases, and people like, oh, I can't wait to get together and play again. I was like, really? I mean, I don't feel like that urgency anymore. I mean, for that period, you know, so I'm just sharing some snippets of thoughts things that came to my mind and my feelings. So I think, you know, navigating through it all, and like you said, the bigger context of the world and all the conversations, I think it was an important period to be part of that, and to really face, you know, difficult issues. And I'm speaking as a non-American. I mean, now I'm an American citizen, but you know, I didn't grow up here, so it's a very different background and perspective as well. Because coming from Brazil, which is in a way the most Africanized place in the Americas, you know, the majority of the people brought forcefully to be slaves in the Americas came to Brazil. So it's the same conversation, but a completely different perspective. And I mean, we could go on and on this, but I'm just saying all these elements, I think, were part of this period and all these conversations, and it was very transformative, you know, I think, and really opened my eyes and my family's eyes. You know, we talked about a lot of these things. We were in a lot of those protests, and we brought the instruments and playing and kind of trying to join in with the voices, you know. But yeah, I don't know, I just feel like I had so many of those different peaks and valleys, you know, throughout this time. But what kind of kept it together in a way was this commitment to making music and making art and trying to, I don't think I have an answer really, to be honest. Oh yeah, I found, you know, I don't feel like I had the answer, but I'm still trying to do it and trying to make music and trying to collaborate with people that are, you know, that we have the same kind of mindset, and still looking for something, you know. I don't feel like I've arrived, but I just keep going, you know, some days better than others, but yeah, that's my most honest possible answer.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. that resonates a lot. And it sounds like we have a third conversation to have about Brazil versus America and some of these issues. It sounds like there's a lot to learn there. Kaoru, it seems like you've been kicked out of this answer that you're about to give is so heavy that you've been kicked out of the space that you're in. No, I'm just joking.
It was a vacuum cleaner that went up.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think I just hunkered down, and I really focused on time with my daughter and my partner, and tried to stay focused. I was kind of surprised. I wrote like 20 pieces in 2020 of like stuff that I, stuff that I really spent time working on and developing. And one interesting thing that came out of that was that I feel like I was writing very joyful music, which is something that I hadn't really done somehow, like without consciously doing it. Like the music was very kind of hopeful and uplifting, I don't know, for me at least. And so I think it felt like it kind of broke open a different aspect of myself. That whole 2-year period. I got sick right at the beginning of the pandemic in March and April. Did you hear that? Is that bothering you? It's vacuum cleaner? Okay, maybe it's about it. So I got pretty sick right at the beginning of when everything was just the shit hit the fan, and we didn't know what was going on, and I had like a fever for 10 days, and this is way before at the very beginning when so that really kind of set the tone for me for the pandemic of just like, okay, I got through it. I feel like my breathing helped me get through it because as a flute player, like I was able to just like control and absorb and stay healthy, fight the virus and just kind of and come back strongly. And that kind of just launched things, and I felt I just wanted to stay strong and stay creative, and really I hunkered down and spending time with my kid, who I wasn't able to do as much, being on the road for much and things.
When am I right, Kaoru? The show you did at Joe's Pub in some way was a kind of
a culmination.
I want to say unveiling or so. Yeah, like this is a lot of work I've made over the last year. Yeah, that was really inspiring.
Thank you. Yeah, it was and it was using like Ableton and things to like loop and because I was playing by myself for a year basically.
No Rogério.
Right.
Yeah.
So I felt it was a really I tried to make lemonade out of lemons basically, and try to really push through, and the whole thing about like the thinking about heritage and thinking about the meaning of being Japanese American and playing Black American music, and these are the conversations, as I mentioned, I was really struggling with in 1998 when I was graduating from college, and that to the point where I'd moved to Japan. I moved to a different country, and then thinking about as a person who plays Japanese instruments, representing Japanese music. And when I see people playing taiko, for example, and oh, is that racist? The way they're presenting Japanese culture when they don't know anything about Japanese culture? Like these are things, and even in the work that I do, whether it's working, we talked about like with Wes Anderson and Isle of Dogs, it's like, okay, well, there's a few things in here in the movie that are kind of bothering me, and I had long conversations with Wes about it. It's like, representation of so these are, conversations. As obviously, it's not like I'm the only person who's been having these conversations, but these are conversations that have been happening for a long time, and I'm actually, if anything, really happy that it really kind of became almost volatile in how people were, kind of going at each other and trying to call each other out, and also, coming to terms with their own responsibility and what they're able to do, including myself. I'm not free of, I'm not by any means a perfect individual. So really kind of going back and thinking about how I'm representing culture, how other people how I approach people. Should I not say anything? Should I say something? Should I, you know, yeah. So it's just
I
really
remember,
bringing clarity to things.
yeah,
Yeah.
having a really interesting conversation, even with you at SOSI, when you were presenting some. I think a lot of composers, even at that time, were saying like, you know, looking for answers of like, well, wait, if I like that sound, am I allowed to use it? And those kind of conversations. And I'm loving hearing where you all are coming from, because for me, it's such a funny thing. I have very little interest in going deeper into my Bavarian roots. You know, like I have very little interest. I mean, like I have no problem with Beethoven, whatever. It's not music that gets me really excited. My like Germanic, like, you know, very, you know, all over classical music roots is not where I'm looking to go. So almost for me, it's kind of like how to be responsible and respectful when you do dive into another culture's music, or feel influence or feel interest. Thinking back to my, you know, junior or senior year self, you know, when I'm trying, I mean, Kaoru, I did this just ridiculous, wonderful, but ridiculous, like senior year of high school recital, where I got a bunch of my friends together. I played a ton of marimba music that I loved. And in between, we played a ton of just drum music, like everything from like, you know, weird, just transcriptions of stuff or whatever. And I built these X stands and put floor toms on top of these stands. And, you know,
really?
Yeah.
Oh man,
you know,
where's the video?
Like, you know, 17-year-old, 18-year-old Southern California. But also for the dramatic flair, my poor buddies, we would play all this stuff. And then when I went to play the marimba music, they would stand there like this.
Waiting.
And I just imagined like what they're, you know, they're like.
and you told them this, wait, you're like, okay, man, you're going to just stand there.
Yeah. It's like, it's going to be really dramatic, you know, like.
Were they wearing loincloths?
No.
Okay.
Thank you for asking that question. I think even 18-year-old Jason would have known that's messed up. Like to just be like, yeah, don't know anything about this, just put on some loincloth. But just like, you know, I think I have a much deeper into that conversation now about what's influence, what's excitement about learning from others, and what's appropriation. And it's a heavy conversation, but I think, you know, I feel like, yeah, I have less to dive into in my roots. When you speak to learn, you know, going to Japan or Rogério, when you're dissecting kind of like what's the bebop tradition and what am I bringing, and even I would love to talk to you more, Rogério. I have a student at Bard right now who's from Brazil and was doing some presentations on, you know, learning more about Airto. Like I know Airto as a you know, fan of Weather Report and that kind of stuff, but like, you know, digging into where those rhythms really came from. There's just so much interest in where the three of you all, the kind of percussion traditions and
2003 Earth Celebration, the main guest was Arto Moreira.
Oh, no way.
And Flora, yeah, so Kodo and yeah.
Amazing.
It was great. Yeah.
Well, maybe that's a good, the last question I ask everybody, and maybe that's a good segue, Kaoru, is just a much kind of maybe happier kind of remembering kind of question. Pre-pandemic concerts, you know, I'll always say at this moment that, you know, so when we tour, you know, we have our kind of tour stories, you know, that kind of get us through, you know, they're like, oh, remember when this crazy thing happened on stage, or remember this amazing concert, or remember this, everybody left, you know, or just like, you know, remember this, whatever it was, this, you know, the amazing time this happened, you know, the kind of the thing that kind of, when it's hard being on the road, you get, you kind of, you know, keep the glue of the band by this kind of like these common stories. And I'm sure the more we tell the stories, the more false they get, you know what I mean? Like they get built up, you know, but these, you know, nevertheless, like really wonderful memories as a band playing together. And right now, not having those experiences as much, you know, I wonder if you all have a fun concert experience to share, that's memorable in any way, either because it was just like, you know, the most memorable set of music that you got to play with your buddies or your band, or because some crazy shit happened, you know, like.
Are you saying is this true or just in general for our own?
I think it could go either way, but I guess when you mentioned the Earth Festival, it's like, oh, right, I'm sure you each have these amazing, you know, things on your own as well.
Yeah. Rogério?
I'm trying to think about something that would be interesting for other people to listen to.
Just think about me. Just think about me. I'm down.
I don't know. Nothing really pops up. I mean, it's been quite a long time since we got, to do the stuff. I mean, Kaoru mentioned, Brian was,
Yeah.
I think that the biggest tour thing I did before the pandemic was with his band, and it's just so amazing to just be around him. I mean, I would go on tour just to listen, if I could, just okay, let's get me a seat right there. I don't need to play. That's how I feel, being around him, and just it's incredible. I mean, I could spend hours talking about how amazing he's as a person and as a musician and as a friend and band leader. Is ridiculous, how he would stay in the hotel, checking until everyone had is everything okay, everything all right. I mean, he was taking care of us like I couldn't believe.
He was
so
the tour manager.
yeah, he was the tour manager, and
That's really
the
beautiful.
flights and asking people,
Yeah.
oh, what companies you have mileage, like, I mean, he was trying to accommodate everyone and everything. I was like, come on, Brian. He was like, and then musically, he's the most embracing musician I know. Like, even before I think about playing, he was already opening that space. As a drummer percussion kind of relationship, I can't say there's another person that I've played with that is so embracing and welcoming, and he just opens this bit. I mean, being who he is, musically, he can just, I mean, he doesn't need me for anything. That's how I feel. Like, but he's like always, no, just, you bring something, and just like so generous, as a person. That's the reflection of who he is. So
well, I like you telling that story of the hotel check-ins and then telling the story of on stage, and it sounds like that's the same human.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like I'm are you okay? Do you need, what do you know?
Yeah.
I have a memory. The first time I saw him play was I grew up in Southern California. I used to drive up to hang. My other sister lives in Berkeley. And do you all know that jazz club Yoshi's? Do you know that spot? So I think hearing him play, I think it was Josh Redman's band, I'm sure. Christian McBride, I don't know who was playing, but that was the first time. I was young, and I was like,
Meldo.
Yeah. It was like, what is, I didn't know so much about jazz at the moment. I was in like, the 90s was in LA, the 90s, it was a lot of like Dave Weckl and like, like clinics, that kind of vibe, and this was like, what is this touch? What is this sound? What is like
the lightness?
Really cool.
And
yeah. And then, yeah, totally. Yeah. And then eating sushi, it's like, this is amazing. Like, more jazz clubs like this. This is amazing.
You didn't spit it out though in the plant.
No, by then I was cool. Yeah. Thanks, Kaoru, for that callback. It's embarrassing. What about you, man? What can you bring us out with, Kaoru?
For me, I would say in the beginning of or spring of 2021, after a year of not performing outside of online stuff, my first live gig was at the Park Avenue Armory.
Yeah.
And it was with the aforementioned Laurie Anderson, the pianist Jason Moran, and the guitarist Vernon Reed, from Living Color.
I do.
And so after a year of kind of not, I mean, it was, of just not doing anything, with anyone, this is my first show out at this huge venue, this beautiful, space that they had created with all these lights. And it was to this party at the Bardo, which was a concept, I guess, that Lou Reed did, where he had a bunch of guitar drones going.
Yeah.
So they had a bunch of Lou's guitars and his amps creating this incredible drone filling up this cavernous space. And we were doing this kind of structured improvisational thing. And there was like cavernous space, but only like 100 people there, like just spread out throughout this room. And it's just like this, it's just poetry, just being in that space. And I remember we finished it, and it was like, and besides the fact there was a pandemic, it was kind of such a really moving kind of otherworldly experience. But then the fact that it was coming out of this pandemic, and I mean, it's not really finished yet, but this is the first
that feeling at that moment. Yeah.
It was just, it really kind of was a lifeline. Like it just kind of, I felt so elevated. And I remember I got home and I took a picture of me smiling, like, okay, remember this feeling.
Yeah.
Because I knew that it wasn't, 2021 was also going to be pretty rough. And so, yeah, that was kind of a big one for me.
And so cool. I remember seeing, I saw some pictures you put up of that, thinking like, man, this is so special. Because I remember at that moment, we didn't play, I think, till May, but anytime you got together and played music for people, it was like, felt tearful and just so much gratitude. And like, I want to hold on to this feeling that every concert could feel this way, Yeah. But then that amplified by that space, Laurie Anderson, Vernon, Jason, I mean, that's amazing. We should wrap up, but you mentioned Vernon Reid. We played a show in August and he was on the bill.
Oh, nice.
And we were setting up some instruments. This vocal percussionist, Shodake Talaferro, wrote us this piece, and it uses a bunch of sleigh bells. And we wouldn't usually play sleigh bells, but four of us have these sleigh bells hanging. And Vernon was just like, yes, sleigh bells. The erudite man's cowbell. That's what he said. It's like, yeah. Yeah, he was amazing. I definitely grew up on, in Living Color.
Yeah.
So good. Well, awesome. I know we talked for way longer than I was expecting. I think you all have rehearsals to get to.
Yes.
My apologies. It's just too many interesting things to check out. Rogério, great to meet you, and thanks for taking the time, man. Kaoru, so good to connect. We have other things to connect on. We have a dinner I think we gotta plan. Let's make it happen.
Let's do that.
But I'll see both of you along with your trio partner Sameer. I'm gonna talk to him soon. We'll see you at Roulette.
Great.
Thank you so much. All right, take it easy. See y'all later.